They came for it like it was a bomb. At 10:43 a.m. on a Tuesday, no less. The kind of morning where the only thing I expected to detonate was the gas line on my neighbor's grill if he kept ignoring the birds' nests. I was 3 sips into a decent cup of coffee, watching the mail truck make its lazy crawl, when I heard the sound of gravel crunching under boots. Then came the whine of an angle grinder. That's not a neighborhood sound. That's a somebody's getting sued sound. And sure enough, there she was, Tamara Blythe, the HOA president, strutting up my driveway like she was leading a low-bunch SWAT team. Mirrored sunglasses, clipboard in hand, flanked by 2 board members and a guy in an orange vest, carrying bolt cutters that looked like they came from a prison break kit. My stomach didn't drop. My patience did. Because I already knew this wasn't a visit, this was a seizure, and they were after my ammo locker. That's when I realized they weren't here to talk. They were here to take my ammo locker, my federally licensed military-registered bolted-down ammo locker, the one that, if tampered with, sends a real-time alert straight to the Department of Defense, and she was about to touch it. The second I stood up, I knew I'd be wasting my breath with the usual logic. Leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. If you love wild, true-feeling stories packed with twists, justice, and just the right amount of HOA chaos, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story is even more jaw-dropping, and trust me, the surprises coming next, you won't want to miss them. Now let me pause right there before someone imagines a rusty tin box full of shotgun shells and conspiracy theories. This wasn't a prop from a doomsday bunker. It was a federally licensed, military-registered ballistic-grade storage unit, locked, bolted, and synced with a live alert system that talked directly to a Department of Defense server in Virginia. It wasn't just locked down, it was watching back. I really did, to explain that to Tamara, that this wasn't just some aesthetic violation under subsection who cares, that it had clearance protocols, alert systems, and legal protections she couldn't override with a clipboard and sass. But Tamara smiled like I'd just told her I built rockets in my backyard for fun. She tilted her head, pointed to the locker, and declared, "This structure violates Aesthetic Code 4.2b. Unauthorized metal fixture visible from street view. It must be removed immediately." That's when her bolt cutter boy stepped forward, gripped the bottom lock, and squeezed. And that's when the light on the locker blinked red. Now, you ever seen someone poke a bear and smile about it until a bear moves? That's what this was. Except instead of a bear, it was 4 black SUVs that hit the block 15 minutes later like the government's idea of subtlety. Matte black, no plates, tinted windows so dark they looked like they absorbed sunlight. They didn't slow down, they didn't wave. They stopped in front of my lawn with the kind of urgency usually reserved for hostage rescue. 4 men got out in gear that said "combat ready" louder than any introduction ever could. No yelling, no guns drawn, just that military efficiency that makes you wonder if your birth certificate is in the right drawer. Tamara tried to greet them like it was a block party. "Hi, I'm the HOA president," was as far as she got before the tallest one raised a gloved hand and said, "Ma'am, step away from the structure." And just like that, the HOA's grip on the narrative fell apart faster than a garage sale umbrella in a wind tunnel. They swept the area in seconds. One officer pulled up footage from my locker's internal cameras. Another logged the breach attempt and traced Tamara's movement, her fingerprints, her voice, her face. It was all there, synced, time-stamped, and cloud-confirmed. She tried to blame the contractor, said he acted alone, said she didn't authorize the bolt cutters. But the footage disagreed. And so did the photos she took before the attempt. Selfies, no less. Tamara had posed with the locker like it was a sightseeing stop. And because her phone was logged into the HOA's cloud, guess where those pictures went? That's right. Uploaded, geotagged, and auto-synced to an unsecured server labeled HOA Community Access. What she thought was an Instagram moment had just become a federal infraction. They didn't arrest her, not yet, but they made it real clear that what she touched was a protected asset. And in federal language, protected doesn't mean suggested. It means try again and find out. When they were done, one of the agents came over to me. "Big guy," name tag said Halbrook, and he gave me this slight nod, like he'd seen this kind of nonsense before. "You did the right thing not confronting them," he said. "This is exactly why protocol exists." I didn't respond right away. I just looked over at Tamara, standing there like a kid caught drawing on the walls, pretending the crayon wasn't in her hand. The neighborhood was starting to peek out now, garage doors half open, curtains parting, everyone wondering why their suburban peace just got a taste of federal thunder. I asked Halbrook the question I already knew the answer to. "So, what happens now?" He looked at Tamara and said, "Now we investigate who gave her the idea she had any authority here." And that was it. By noon, the SUVs were gone. The coffee in my mug was cold, and Tamara Blythe had officially crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Not with meetings, not with memos, not with the world's angriest clipboard. And here's what she didn't know, because people like her never do. That locker? It wasn't full of weapons. It was full of archived tech specs, encrypted documentation, and secure code samples from my time as a systems engineer under a classified government contract. Stuff I was cleared to store, secure, and protect. The kind of stuff that doesn't like being touched, photographed, or cut open by suburban warlords with manicured fingernails. And now? Her face, her prints, her photos, they were part of the breach report. The first one. Because that blink wasn't the end. It was the start of something a whole lot louder. And Tamara, bless her heart, had just pressed the button. The next day, Tamara tripled down like she was betting the neighborhood in Vegas. Flyers showed up on every doorstep like credit card offers from hell, thick stock paper, color ink, and a bright red header screaming, "Emergency, safety meeting, tonight." And smack dab in the center of the flyer, a stock photo of a rusty hand grenade, watermark still faintly visible because she clearly thought fear was more powerful than Photoshop. The caption under it, "Weapons stored near children." I stood on my porch holding it like it might explode in my hands. This wasn't just bold, it was delusional. And if you're wondering whether Tamara finally snapped, you're asking the wrong question. Tamara didn't snap. She scheduled her breakdown and sent out RSV. Before noon, the neighborhood group chat was lit up like a casino buffet. Everyone suddenly had an opinion, a cousin in the army, or a printed copy of the HOA charter they hadn't read since 2004. Tamara was in there too, dropping legal-sounding buzzwords like risk assessment and civic duty while refusing to answer simple questions like what exactly I was storing. "I can't say due to pending investigations," she typed, like she was under NDA with the Pentagon. Then she posted a grainy, zoomed-in screenshot of one of the black SUVs parked near my house. No context, just the caption, "Is this what we want near our children's playground?" I was tempted to respond, "It beats your cousin Doug with bolt cutters," but I figured I'd save that one for later. When I arrived at the community center that evening, it was packed. Folding chairs, whispering neighbors, and an odd silence that settled over the room like fog. Everyone was looking for answers, or at least a break from Tamara's hysteria. She stood at the front in her best power suit, which looked like it had been ironed by stress. Beside her, Lyle Jenkins, the treasurer, held a clicker like it might bite him. Tamara cleared her throat and began, "Thank you for coming. I know recent events have been unsettling." She paused dramatically, like she was about to reveal the third act of a true crime documentary. Then the slides began. First, SUV photo. Second, a playground with yellow tape photoshopped across it. Third, a map with my house marked in red like I was running a meth lab. "This," she said, "is what happens when secrecy lives next door." I could feel my blood pressure climbing, and not from caffeine. I waited until she paused long enough for the room to breathe, then stood up. Slowly. I held a manila folder in one hand. "This," I said calmly, "is a letter from the Department of Defense, confirming that my locker is a federally registered, legally permitted structure. It contains technical documentation, not weapons. It poses no threat, unless you bring a bolt cutter and a god complex." A ripple of laughter hit the back row. I passed a few copies of the letter down the aisle. You don't need a degree in common sense to see what's happening here. Tamara violated federal law, and now she's handing out grenades with clip art. Tamara opened her mouth to speak, but the room wasn't with her anymore. Lyle stared at his shoes, and someone near the snack table muttered, "Did she really use a grenade pick?" Like I said, Vegas odds, but with HOA. You'd think that would have ended it. A room full of adults seeing through the fog machine. But Tamara doesn't fold. She faxes. The very next morning, she submitted a report to Homeland Security. No, I'm not kidding. Homeland. Using their public suspicious activity portal, she sent in a full dossier of edited photos, shaky phone videos, and a voiceover she recorded herself, calling my locker a covert weapons storage unit disguised as a federal research asset. She even gave it a nickname, the War Box. Her submission included a video she stitched together like a low-budget Netflix special. Dramatic zooms, ominous music, and her narrating over footage of me mowing the lawn like I was casing a building. I only knew about it because someone in the HOA chat leaked the link. "This feels illegal," one neighbor posted. Also, "Is that royalty pre-music?" another wrote. "That's our tax dollars at work, investigating a guy who feeds squirrels." Homeland didn't storm my door, at least not yet, but her stunt triggered a real review. You don't accuse someone of harboring WMDs in a cul-de-sac and not set off a few alarms. And Tamara? She was proud of it. She paraded around the block with that same smug grin, clipboard in one hand and iced latte in the other, like she was the queen of wartime suburbia. "Just doing my duty," she said to one neighbor. "You can't be too careful these days." Careful? She used Comic Sans on the flyer. The only thing she was careful about was ignoring reality. But this wasn't about logic anymore. This was about control. And Tamara would rather burn down her reputation than admit she lit the match. By dinner, the fallout was already spreading. A few of the quieter board members began texting around, asking if maybe this had gone too far. Elijah, the tech guy on the HOA board, quietly emailed me a heads up. I didn't approve the Homeland report. She sent it without a vote. His tone was nervous, like someone realizing the boat was leaking and the captain was drilling new holes. I thanked him and filed the message away. Meanwhile, Tamara launched her next campaign, this time claiming she had a compliance agency reviewing potential code violations on my property. I checked the letterhead. It was a Gmail account and a fake P.O. box. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just unhinged. She was building her own fictional government. And if she was willing to invent agencies, what else would she make up next? She should be rattled. I wasn't. I was just tired. Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep, but the kind you get from explaining basic facts to someone who thinks Google Docs makes them a federal agent. But I knew something Tamara didn't. The louder she got, the more she exposed herself. And soon, she'd go too far. She always did. People like her always do. And when that moment came, I wouldn't raise my voice. I'd raise my folder. The one with every screenshot, every fake letter, every digital trail she left like breadcrumbs in a landmine field. And trust me, she was only a few steps away from stepping on one. So if you thought Tamara's flyer fiasco and homemade Homeland report were the peak of HOA crazy, oh friend, we're just warming up. Because next, she trades the clipboard for a bulldozer. Yeah, you heard that right. And what happens when she tries to tear out a federal asset before sunrise? Let's just say, not everybody walks away with their lawn untrampled. If you're loving this ride through suburban insanity and sweet, sweet justice, don't forget to hit subscribe, like, and share. You won't want to miss what happens when the HOA goes from petty to full-blown criminal and the neighborhood stops watching from the windows and starts picking sides. See you in the next one. It started with a doorbell chime that didn't sound like my usual Amazon package. This one had a rhythm, 2 short, 1 long, that said, "We're here, and we don't ring twice." When I opened the door, 2 men in suits stood on my porch. No sunglasses, no smiles, just calm faces and clipped introductions. Homeland Security. Not the tactical kind from last week. These were the suit and tie variety. 10 credentials deep, 0 patience for HOA drama. They asked to speak inside, and something about their tone told me they weren't here for coffee. I nodded, led them to the living room, and waited for them to get to the point. Spoiler, the point had Tamara's fingerprints all over it. Literally. Once seated, one of them pulled out a tablet. "We received a public security report tied to your address. Upon review, some network anomalies flagged a breach traceable to HOA cloud storage. Can you explain what was inside the locker?" I kept it simple. Code archives, storage documentation from a defunct but still classified defense contract. Not weapons, not explosives, but still restricted. Then I showed them the footage from my home surveillance system. Tamara posing, tapping the keypad, snapping selfies like she was starring in a reality show about bad decisions. I pointed out her phone, logged into the HOA server, and explained how her photos auto-synced, triggering a metadata ping that matched with a government file index. She didn't hack anything, I said. She just didn't know how cloud storage works. The agents exchanged a look. That's when I knew it wasn't just a neighborhood issue anymore. They confirmed it. The act of uploading geotagged photos of a registered federal asset, intended or not, had tripped an automatic cybersecurity failsafe, a protocol designed for real threats, not HOA fanfiction. It didn't matter that Tamara didn't know. The system didn't grade for intent, it just responded. "Think of it like a motion sensor," one agent said, "except it listens to data, not footsteps." They didn't arrest her. Not yet, but they did advise me formally to retain all surveillance footage, correspondence, and HOA documents going forward. "Document everything," they said. "This may evolve." Evolve? That was a generous word for what was coming. It wasn't going to evolve, it was going to detonate. With a PDF trail. I walked them out, thanked them, and before their SUV had even turned the corner, I started backing up every file I had to an encrypted drive. Photos, emails, HOA minutes, even Tamara's grenade flyer, because when Homeland gives you homework, you don't wing it. You write a thesis. Meanwhile, the neighborhood group chat was on fire. Someone posted, "Why are feds back at Reed's place?" Someone else responded, "Tamara called them, remember?" Lyle Jenkins finally popped in with a rare message. "I thought we weren't submitting that report without board approval." Tamara replied with the online version of a shrug. "Emergency leadership protocol." Translation, she panicked and hit send. But the digital world doesn't forget. And now even Lyle was starting to realize this wasn't about safety anymore. This was about survival. That night, I sat on my porch with a fresh cup of decaf and reread Tamara's post from 3 days earlier. We must act before federal oversight finds a reason to act for us. She had no idea how prophetic that was. The irony could have been bottled. Because now she wasn't just a clipboard warrior. She was a case file, and every keystroke, every blurry photo, every message sent through that HOA cloud was part of the record. I could feel the tone of the neighborhood shifting. The same people who once crossed the street to avoid talking to me were now watching Tamara like she might spontaneously combust. I didn't gloat, I prepared, because when your HOA president is one login away from a federal indictment, it's not gardening season anymore, it's planting evidence season, and I had a front row seat for the harvest. The storm didn't roll in with thunder. It showed up at 5:12 a.m. on a Thursday in the form of a diesel engine, idling low outside my property line like it was unsure if it should announce itself or sneak in wearing flip-flops. I peeked out the window, and there it was. A flatbed truck hitched to a mini bulldozer, all parked like they were staging a garage demolition reality show. And who was supervising this illegal sunrise production? None other than Tamara Blythe herself, in a bathrobe, sandals, and gripping a flashlight like she was leading a SWAT raid on a garden gnome uprising. Her cousin, Doug, The unlicensed contractor/weed puller was unloading straps and gesturing toward my ammo locker like he'd just spotted buried treasure. Now, I'm not an early riser by choice, but there's something about watching your federally protected property about to get ripped out by someone named Doug that'll launch you out of bed faster than caffeine ever could. I threw on boots, grabbed my phone, and stepped outside, still tying my sweatshirt as I hit the lawn. Tamara was already mid-call, whispering words like, "Before sunrise, no security cameras online yet, and he can't stop us if it's already gone." Bold strategy, considering the motion sensor on the locker had already pinged my phone, the local police, and the military liaison. Before she could finish her little sentence, the second Doug fired up the bulldozer. Blue and red lights blinked into the mist. A patrol car coasted to a silent stop behind her truck, followed by a military vehicle with no logos, just quiet authority. One officer stepped out with a clipboard. Another didn't bother with paperwork, just calmly rested his hand on his holster and said, "Shut it down. Now." Doug's face went pale. Tamara blinked like someone had just told her her Wi-Fi password expired. The officers didn't ask many questions. They didn't need to. One look at the vehicle, the tools, and the angle of the bulldozer's scoop said everything. The lead military officer stepped forward and stated, clear and calm, "This is a violation of Title 50 of the U.S. Code. You are attempting to tamper with protected infrastructure." Tamara opened her mouth, probably to spin one of her famous half-legal monologues, but all that came out was air and confusion. Bill tried to inch backward toward the truck, but the local officer cut him off. "Where you headed, son? That trailer doesn't unhook itself." That's when the neighborhood began to wake up. One porch light, then two. People in slippers, clutching mugs, drawn outside like moths to the world's most satisfying train wreck. No one said a word, because no one had to. The visual was doing all the talking. Tamara stood there frozen, wrapped in terry-cloth authority and delusions of power. The military officer asked for names. Doug hesitated, then coughed up his first and last like they were poison. Tamara tried to distance herself. "I was just here to supervise. I didn't know he would—" But the officer cut her off. "Your email authorization was provided by another board member. You planned this. That makes it premeditated." Her mouth twitched. Lyle Jenkins appeared at the edge of his driveway and immediately turned around like he'd forgotten something urgent, his spine probably, and just when it looked like Tamara might regain some ground, the officer held up a copy of her previous Homeland report and said, "You've escalated this situation beyond HOA jurisdiction. We are now treating this as a formal breach case." You could almost hear the last shred of her self-confidence hit the sidewalk. By noon, the truck had been impounded, Doug was in custody, and Tamara had been instructed not to leave her property, pending further questioning. But the real punch came later that evening. The HOA board held an emergency meeting, not to support her but to resign. One by one they stepped down, citing Tamara's reckless behavior, abuse of power, and disregard for federal warnings. The only person who didn't resign was Tamara, because she wasn't given the chance. She was removed, unanimously. And just as she opened her mouth to object, Elijah, the tech guy, handed her a sheet of paper. It wasn't a resignation form. It was a list of federal statutes she'd violated, complete with timestamps, metadata logs, and attached evidence. Tamara went quiet for the first time in a week. No rant, no denial, just that look people get when the fantasy finally dies. And trust me, you'll want to stick around, because the next thing she does, it's even dumber. So, after getting bulldozed by reality and booted out of her own board, you'd think Tamara would finally call it quits, right? Wrong, because next she trades legal fiction for full-blown forgery and tries to reinvent herself as a fake government agency. Yeah, buckle up, because the paper trail gets wild and the feds are just getting started. If you've enjoyed watching this HOA horror story unravel one bad decision at a time, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give it a like, and share it with anyone who's ever had to deal with a clipboard tyrant. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when Tamara tries to outsmart Washington with a Gmail address. See you in the next part. You'd think getting removed from the HOA board in front of half the neighborhood and a federal officer would be enough to make someone reconsider their life trajectory, maybe take up yoga, volunteer at a soup kitchen. But Tamara, she came back swinging. 2 days later, I got a letter taped to my door from something called the National Compliance and Aesthetic Integrity Agency. Sounds official, right? I thought so too, until I looked at the email address. Gmail, the logo, stretched clipart. No website, no phone number, no seal. Just a P.O. box and a signature that looked suspiciously like Tamara's in disguise. It was like someone tried to impersonate the IRS using Microsoft Paint and wishful thinking. And that's when I realized she wasn't retreating, she was rebranding. The letter accused me of environmental misconduct, visual pollution, and my personal favorite, operational defiance. That one sounded like something you'd hear in a Marvel villain's HR file. I scanned it, backed it up, and dropped it in the binder. Yes, the binder. By now, it had grown from a slim folder into a full-blown 3-ring archive. Tabs, dividers, time-stamped exhibits. Every flyer, every screenshot, every HOA chat meltdown was cataloged like a suburban war record. Not because I was scared. No, this wasn't fear. This was strategy. Because when someone's this determined to go down swinging, you don't bring a bat, you bring receipts. That same afternoon, 2 people rang my doorbell. Not clipboard warriors, not neighborhood watch wannabes. No, these were professionals, military legal professionals. One wore a full JAG uniform, the other introduced herself as a liaison for federal oversight. Calm, polite, and carrying a folder thicker than mine. "We've been assigned to review the Maplewood Estates case," the officer said, specifically interference with secured infrastructure and misuse of administrative authority by private entities. Translation: Tamara's fake compliance agency tripped a whole new layer of alarms. I invited them in and handed over my binder without a word. They didn't flip through it, they studied it, like they were building a case not just around the locker, but around her entire digital footprint. Turns out, Tamara's creative liberties with cloud storage, fabricated citations, and unauthorized data access had triggered a secondary protocol, one that reviewed how secure infrastructure was handled by surrounding civilian governance. "Normally, these kinds of HOA skirmishes stay local," the JAG officer said. "But the minute you impersonate regulatory authority to manipulate compliance outcomes, it becomes fraud." I asked what that meant in plain English. He replied, "It means whoever helped her rubber stamp this circus could be looking at federal penalties." I blinked. "Even Jenkins?" He nodded. "Especially Jenkins." Suddenly, that lemon-faced treasurer's disappearing act made a lot more sense. Before they left, they handed me a formal cease and desist order, directed not at me, but at the Maplewood Estates HOA. Any future interference with the locker or related documentation would be treated as obstruction of federal oversight. It was written plainly, but the subtext was loud and clear. The neighborhood had stopped being cute. This wasn't a power struggle anymore, it was a case file. And Tamara, she'd gone from nuisance to liability. I watched from the window as the JAG officer took photos of the perimeter, marked coordinates, and made notes. He wasn't just documenting. He was drawing a map of accountability, and Tamara had put herself dead center. The fallout came fast. Word of the visit spread through the neighborhood faster than the local gossip blog. Screenshots of the cease and desist flew through group chats. A few former board members started posting thinly veiled apologies. And Tamara? She went quiet. No flyers, no emergency alerts, just silence. But the kind of silence that doesn't mean surrender. It means recalculating. And I knew she had one more trick up her sleeve. She always did. Because when someone builds a paper kingdom, they never think the ink will be used as evidence. So the only question left was, how far would she go before the feds took the pen away? Stick around. You're going to want to see how this ends. You'd think a cease and desist order signed by military legal command would signal the end of Tamara's little HOA rampage. Like maybe now she'd invest in some self-reflection or at least take a vacation far from clipboards and municipal code. But Tamara didn't retreat. She pivoted. Within 48 hours, a new drama unfolded, this time featuring two guys in a pickup with an unmarked trailer, reversing into my driveway like they were making a furniture delivery to Alcatraz. One hopped out with gloves and a hydraulic jack. The other started anchoring straps around the base of my locker like he was about to win a county fair for boldest felony before breakfast. I stepped outside just as they started positioning the winch. "You touch that locker," I called out, "and I guarantee Homeland won't be the only one calling." They froze like squirrels caught holding a sparkler. One finally stammered, "We were told it was abandoned, said it was okay to remove." I pointed to the bright yellow plaque bolted to the front, "Federal property, tampering punishable by law." Their faces dropped like their trailer hitch. They didn't even ask for payment, just backed up and vanished into a puff of diesel and regret. Of course, I documented everything. License plate, timestamp, video footage, the whole kit. I sent it to the military liaison I'd spoken with days earlier, who responded faster than my internet provider during an outage. He thanked me, asked for the footage, and mentioned the case had officially escalated to a broader review of HOA leadership practices. Apparently, Tamara's compliance agency had crossed a line from phony into federally problematic: fraudulent identity, fabricated documentation, attempted unauthorized seizure of protected property. I stopped counting after 5 statutes. But the kicker? One of the agents flagged her HOA emails, specifically the ones where she encouraged board members to bleed him dry through citations and make an example of the Warbox guy. When your plans start reading like villain dialogue from a straight-to-streaming political thriller, you're past the point of saving face as you're negotiating sentence length. That evening, a knock at my door surprised me. It wasn't the feds, it was Lucas, a quiet board member I barely knew. Guy looked like someone who had just realized he'd backed the wrong horse in the ugliest derby of the year. He handed me a manila folder and said, "I can't be part of this anymore." Inside? Printed emails from Tamara, draft memos, and a detailed plan to have my locker forcibly relocated, reclassified, or destroyed, whichever would get the fastest HOA vote. She even used the phrase, "cut it off like a dead limb." Lucas apologized and walked off like he'd just escaped a cult. I added it all to the binder, now too thick to close without a second clasp. At this point, it wasn't just documentation. It was a survival record, and Tamara had signed most of the pages with her own ego. It didn't take long for the board to implode. At the next public meeting, which felt more like a courtroom drama without the gavel, one by one the remaining members announced their resignations. Lyle Jenkins, ever the coward, blamed miscommunications. Elijah simply said, "I didn't sign up for this." The only person who didn't speak was Tamara, because she wasn't allowed in. She'd been banned from all administrative activity, pending federal investigation. I watched it all from the back row, arms crossed, trying not to smirk too hard. But when they officially removed her clause, the one about external metal structures being subject to aesthetic review, I couldn't help it. I clapped, just once, loud enough to echo. No one stopped me. In fact, a few others joined in. The neighborhood had finally remembered it was allowed to breathe. And the locker? It stayed. I didn't paint it, didn't move it behind a hedge. I added something, though. Right under the federal warning sign, I bolted in a new plaque. One line, etched clean in steel. "Stand here if you've read the Constitution." The kids loved it. Neighbors pointed it out like a landmark, and you know what? It became one. Not because of what it held, but because of what it represented, that some things once stood for. Don't need to be moved. Not for HOA rules, not for personal vendettas, not even for a woman with a lifetime supply of toner and a fantasy of power. Tamaras Story didn't end with handcuffs or headlines. It ended with an empty clipboard, a silent phone, and a reputation scorched so thoroughly even her former followers wouldn't walk beside her at the grocery store. But if you think that was the last time I heard from her, you might want to stick around, because Tamara had one final move, and it came in the quietest envelope I'd ever opened. And just when I thought the last chapter had closed, I found a small envelope in my mailbox. No return address, just my name in careful handwriting. Inside, a single note. "You were right. I should have listened. I lost everything." No signature. But I didn't need one. The writing was the same cursive Tamara had used years ago when she first welcomed me to the neighborhood. The same woman who once believed rules were hers to rewrite. And now, with no title, no board, and no crowd to clap for her, all that remained was an apology written in silence. I didn't keep it out of sentiment. I kept it as proof that power, real power, isn't in the badge or the clipboard or the meeting minutes. It's in restraint. In holding the line when someone else forgets where it is. That locker became more than steel and bolts. It became a reminder to me, to the neighborhood, and maybe even to you, that no matter how small a fight may seem, standing your ground for what's right is never wasted effort. That sometimes the slow, quiet, paperwork-driven path is the one that delivers the loudest justice. And that arrogance, dressed up as leadership, always collapses under the weight of its own paperwork trail. So what did we really witness here? Not just a feud, not just an HOA meltdown. We saw the anatomy of unchecked control, how it grows, how it manipulates, and how it eventually unravels. We saw what happens when one person believes their authority matters more than truth, more than law, more than respect. And we saw what it looks like when calm, quiet strength wins. That's a lesson I think we all need, whether we're dealing with HOA. If this story made you pause, made you laugh, or made you say, "Yep, I've met a Tamara or two in my life," then you're exactly who this story was meant for. Like it, share it, and most of all, leave a comment and tell us where your line in the sand would be. Because stories like this remind us that rules matter, but so does standing up to the people who weaponize them. And hey, don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next time someone tries to turn power into poison and gets served a hot plate of poetic justice instead. We've got more HOA stories, more neighborhood drama, and more unexpected heroes coming soon. See you in the next one.